Hi, in this book club video, I'm going to talk about a book called Longevity Simplified. It's written by Dr. Howard J. Lux, and Lux is spelled Luks. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. I'm not actually sure the correct pronunciation. Dr. Lux is an orthopedic surgeon and sports medicine specialist. He's based, I think, in New York State. I've been following him online for a while, reading his blog posts, which I've always found really interesting, considered, thoughtful. And I was really excited to see that he had published a book. So there's a few things straight away that jump out at me from the book, from the way it's presented. On the front cover, it says, living a longer, healthier life shouldn't be complicated. And there's several things in here that I think are really important. First, it's not just about living longer. A lot of people focus on that. And I don't know many people who want to live longer if they're not healthy, if their quality of life isn't good. But living a longer and healthier life, brilliant. Total win. So I love the fact that he's covering off both of those elements there. And that he's also talking about it not being too complicated. So much of the health advice out there now is just so complicated, or it's so specific, or it changes from one week to another, or it's focused on minuscule details on doing certain things in certain ways and kind of forgets about the basics and makes it really hard. And I think the problem is that the more complicated these recommendations and suggestions get, the bigger the risk is that we just check out altogether, because you think, oh, well, I read that I'm meant to eat the vegetables, but I'm only meant to eat them if they're steamed. And so if I boil them, there's not much point. And then I'm meant to do this, but I'm meant to walk, but I'm only meant to walk at this time of day and this and that and everything. And suddenly there's so much stuff you should do and so many ways of getting things right or wrong. And it just all becomes absolutely overwhelming. And you just frankly sort of think you might as well kind of, sit in front of the TV eating chocolate biscuits all day, because being healthy is far too complicated, which it isn't and it shouldn't be. And that's why I loved the title of this book. So first of all, I think it's quite interesting that Dr. Lux's kind of trajectory, that he's gone from treating sports injuries to lifestyle optimization, that he's gone from, knee injuries and shoulder tears to focusing on a long and healthy life. That's down to his learning and his research and all the patients he's seen and all the stuff he's sort of understood and taken from all those years of seeing patients and looking into research and understanding what's going on inside our bodies as well as around us in the world. Dr. Lux has 7 key recommendations, which are pretty simple, as we would hope, given the title of the book. And all of these feed into, I'm going to come to them in a minute. I'm going to come to the 7 recommendations in a minute. But his underlying goal and the main thing that he focuses on in the book is our metabolic health. So what is metabolic health? Metabolic health is about our blood sugar levels, our cholesterol, our blood lipid levels, our insulin levels, our blood pressure, all of these various measures. And the other thing that he mentions is the presence of abdominal obesity. So he's actually not worried about overall obesity. I mean, after a certain level, possibly. But it's the abdominal obesity specifically that he references. And all of these measures can be used to sort of determine our metabolic health. And so why does this matter? Why does metabolic health matter? Dr. Lux argues that poor metabolic health is at the root cause of most chronic diseases. And he mentions heart disease, stroke, dementia, type 2 diabetes, and many cancers. He talks a lot about improving our health span, not our lifespan, which I think is a really important distinction. It's about extending the amount of time that we're healthy, that we're fit, that we're able to get out and, do the things that we want and need to do, which is all the stuff that we talk about here in the studio already. Dr. Lux says that he wants to get away from all the noise, from the arguments about detail and back to the simple things like sleep, exercise, and diet. He states very clearly that no single action, exercise, or supplement will by itself extend your life. Which brings me on to his 7 recommendations for simple longevity. The first is to keep a caloric deficit and then stay lean. While he does state that you can be in poor metabolic health if you're thin, so being thin doesn't automatically mean that you're healthy. You can be thin and metabolically unhealthy. You can be overweight and metabolically healthy as long as you don't have too much abdominal obesity. But the ideal is to maintain a caloric deficit and then stay lean once you become lean. He talks a lot about sleep. He also talks a lot about real food. He talks about moving often throughout the day. There's a focus on exercise, on pushing and pulling heavy things. He mentions the importance of socializing. And then the final point is about having a sense of purpose. And those of you who have watched the Power Up Your Brain video series here in the studio, for those of you who haven't seen that series, it's in the Knowledge Zone under the Power Up Your Brain tab. And there's a number of different videos. And we cover the Power Up Your Brain prescription. And you'll notice that it is very, very similar to the recommendations made here by Dr. Lux in his book, Longevity Simplified. That's because the simple things, the basics, they don't change because it's not about a new supplement or a new crazy thing that you do or one thing that you drink every day or do every day. It comes back to the basics, to sleeping well, to eating well, to moving often, and to doing these things well and with intent and thought and care. But still good to know that we've been on the right track all along here in the studio. So starting with sleep, Dr. Lux devotes a whole chapter to the topic of sleep. He lists all the physiological consequences of not getting enough sleep, and that list is quite extensive. His recommendations for sleep, I can't cover them all off here, but a couple of things that he mentions specifically are to avoid sleeping pills and antihistamines. In chapter 3, he talks about delaying dementia, and he discusses some of the links between metabolic health and dementia. He notes that more than 40% of dementia cases are preventable. And he talks to the fact that our risk of developing dementia relies on our genes, but also on the lifestyle choices that we make. And that's why there's such a high degree of preventability or being able to delay the onset of dementia or Alzheimer's. And that's something that I've talked about before in terms of, the genes being there. The genes are the gun, but the lifestyle is what pulls the trigger. And that's what we have control over, which is brilliant. It's fantastic. There's a lot we can do to influence our outcomes in this regard, as in many others. He notes that sleep, healthy diet, and exercise are the only known ways to improve our metabolic health and reduce our risk of developing Alzheimer's or dementia. But what I want to spend the most time discussing is what Dr. Lux explains about exercise. There's numerous sections in the book that discuss exercise, and I'm going to share a few of his perspectives, thoughts, approaches with you here now. I love how he says that the best exercise is the one you enjoy and will keep doing. I love that he recognizes that we don't all want to do sweaty, painful endurance exercise. There's a lot of kind of idolization of runners and endurance cyclists and Ironman athletes and things now. And it's amazing what they do. It's extraordinary. But not all of us want to do that. And it's great to have that recognized. And actually, that for metabolic health, which is the key focus here, a lot of that isn't really necessary. And before I get into his recommendations on exercise, I want to talk about rest. So Dr. Lux said a couple of things that were really interesting and refreshing about rest. So I don't know if you've ever been to the doctor and you've had some kind of injury and they've said, rest. And most of us, when we hear that from a doctor, interpret rest as do nothing. And obviously he's a doctor, and so he's watched how people respond to this recommendation. And he's saying that rest doesn't actually mean do nothing. And so if a doctor ever tells you that they want you to rest, either rest overall or rest a specific joint, limb, body part, whatever it might be, he says ask a lot of questions to understand what they really mean by rest. So he says that his normal interpretation, his meaning, if he tells someone to rest, is to do less, to put less strain. He sees rest as a relative term and states that absolute rest and ceasing all activities is very, very, seldom necessary and generally causes much more harm than good. That's because complete rest leads to a rapid loss of fitness. So I just thought that was a really helpful perspective. And I've often heard people say they've been told to rest. And I've sort of had questions, but not been quite sure how to articulate them, or how to sort of feel like I'm responsibly suggesting that doing nothing isn't the right thing. And so I found it very helpful in that regard. Dr. Lux describes movement as our best medicine. And he talks a lot about arthritis and exercise. Obviously, coming from being an orthopedic surgeon, he's seen many ankles, knees, hips, shoulders, and everything else, and has worked with a lot of people with arthritis, and has heard all the questions and looked into all the research around joint health, arthritis, and exercise. And what he says is really refreshing and interesting. He states very firmly that exercise does not cause osteoarthritis, and that exercising with osteoarthritis is okay. It's not going to further damage your joints. Now, just to clarify, osteoarthritis is what may have had described to us as wear and tear before. You can obviously have it in more than one joint, but the other type of arthritis that you may have heard of is rheumatoid arthritis, which is more of a systemic condition and which we do want to approach differently from osteoarthritis. So his comments here are around osteoarthritis. And so he's saying that there are many more factors involved in the development of osteoarthritis than we realized. And exercise is really such a minor factor that if you have osteoarthritis in a joint, a lot of people avoid exercise or reduce exercise, or they're taking particular care and maybe being more gentle because they feel like, or they've been told, that the exercise is going to damage the joints. And this partly comes from this description of wear and tear, which gives us the idea that the more we use the joint, the more wear we put through it, the more damage we cause to it. And so this leads us to, fairly understandably, assume that more exercise is going to damage the joints, and certainly if it's higher impact or more intense. Dr. Lux, however, explains that osteoarthritis is not primarily a mechanical issue, that it's more biological. And it's about chemicals and hormones and inflammation. If we've had a previous injury, that can be a mechanical reason for the osteoarthritis. But that there are a lot of other things going on that aren't affected in the slightest by exercise. And he says that we should carry on exercising if we have arthritis, even if we have some pain or discomfort. He suggests that if the pain is 4 out of 10 or less, that we should just carry on going. And if it's 5 out of 10 or more, then it doesn't mean we should stop exercising. He never says that, but he says that we should consult with a doctor or a physio to determine the best exercises for us to do. And he reminds us that exercise can minimize our risk of developing osteoarthritis, that weak muscles can predispose us to developing osteoarthritis, and that exercise may delay the need for surgery where we do have issues with our joints. Dr. Lux repeatedly reminds us that exercise needn't involve pain, sweating, hours in the gym. He recommends breaking exercise up into small chunks, bringing exercise in throughout your day, which we talk about a lot here in the studio. We say move more often. He talks about making your day a little bit harder. So that's that, that concept of parking a little further away, taking the stairs. One of the things we talk about here in the studio is if you have, which I got from one of our members actually, who told me that when she's in her house during the day, she has a toilet downstairs, but she chooses to walk to the toilet upstairs so that she gets some more flights of stairs in throughout the day. So that's an example of making your day that little bit harder. And he touches briefly on mental health, but says something really important. He says that if you feel sad, lonely, or anxious, then you must exercise. And I loved that way of just, reminding us of the importance of exercise for our emotional well-being. A couple more things about exercise. Dr. Lux has 3 pillars of an exercise program. The brilliant thing is that one of them is balance training. You're here in the studio. You know that we spend a lot of time working on balance, and it's great to see that reflected elsewhere as well. Another thing that he talks about is that a lot of people fear exercise. But he says that people should fear a lot more the things that will happen if they don't exercise, the frailty, the sarcopenia, which is where we lose muscle mass as we get older if we don't maintain it through exercise. He talks about how many people focus on aerobic exercise and miss out the resistance exercise. Resistance, also known as strength training, weight training. And he explains how for longevity, for health span, that resistance training is crucial. And we're doing lots of that here in the studio. If you're doing any of the Fit for Life videos, any of the Strong Foundations videos, you're doing strength training. And that's because muscle mass and muscle strength are crucial for health span, for longevity. We talk about being fit enough to be able to do all the things you want and need to do. And to give a bit more detail to that, he says that when you're doing resistance training, focus on the legs. And that's because the muscles in our legs are larger. And we want that muscle mass. It's really important for our metabolic health. So just remember that anytime you're doing the squats, the lunges, any of our lower body exercises, they are particularly important. Don't forget the upper body, but that lower body work is crucial, and it's great that he recognizes that and mentions it. So I'm just going to remind you of the sort of 7 key recommendations from the book Longevity Simplified. And then I'm going to let you know, if you want to know any more about those areas, then definitely pick up a copy of the book. And there's a few other things as well that I'm going to tell you about that you might want to learn more about from the book. So Dr. Lux's recommendations are to maintain a caloric deficit. So that's eat less calories than you expend, and to stay lean. He talks about prioritizing sleep, eating real food, moving more throughout the day. He talks about the importance of pushing and pulling heavy things, socializing, and of having a purpose. So if there are any of those areas that you'd like to, think about a little bit more, hear some more suggestions, I definitely recommend picking up the book, because he doesn't make it complicated. It's not about gadgets or gizmos or, clinics on the other side of the world or expensive equipment or supplements. It's really around stuff that most of us can do quite easily at fairly low cost or no cost at all. And there's one area of the book which I haven't particularly mentioned. I mean, there's a lot of the book that I haven't mentioned. It's a nice chunky book, and there's a lot in there. But Dr. Lux talks about tracking of biomarkers. And if that's something that you're interested in, then you might want to dive into the book as well. If you want to learn about which biomarkers to track, which blood tests to do, how to learn more about heart rate training, he gets quite specific and detailed about that. And if that's something that interests you, then I definitely recommend picking up a copy of the book and reading that for yourself. So I hope you've enjoyed this book club summary of Longevity Simplified by Dr. Howard J. Lux. There's a link below to his website to learn more about the book. If you have any questions, pop into the forum and let me know. Thanks so much. Take care.